2, 1. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Inside Movies Galore. I am one of your hosts, but this month starts a new... And sorry, we lost Chris there for a moment. Are you back with us, Chris?
I think so.
Okay. Well,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can definitely hear you.
The category is the one that I suggested, which was basically non-superhero comic book adaptations, specifically Western comics. So anything from the English-speaking world, as well as like maybe French language comics, things like that. Basically, no manga, no Korean comics, no Chinese comics, because those are a different medium altogether. They're a different cultural context, different style of reading, all that stuff. They deserve to have their own category. But yeah, this is all non-superhero Western comic adaptations.
I'd beg to differ on how distinct, but you know.
Well, I think that they do deserve their own. They deserve their own time in the sun.
I agree.
Jake, take her away. Tell us exactly what film we are going to be discussing today.
All right, we are going to have some fun tonight with a very lively and upbeat. Well, not so much, but we are going to be looking
family film.
Yes, exactly. Well, it is a film about family.
That's right.
We are looking at the 2002 gangster-themed film noir comic book adaptation of the Max Allan Collins graphic novel Road to Perdition, as directed by Sam Mendes. This was his sophomore film after American Beauty, and he reteamed with his cinematographer Conrad L. Hall for what was going to be Hall's last time at bat, it turns out. And it is a visually stunning movie, and just in general, a very intriguing one. IMDb gives the brief synopsis of, let's see here. A mob enforcer's son witnesses a murder, forcing him and his father to take to the road, and his father down a path of redemption and revenge. An overly simplified version of the plot. What really forces action is that the mob boss's psychotic son decides to off the witness and accidentally kills the wrong members of the family. And so, nice cheerful beginning there. But this is a film that got a pretty good bit of notice when it came out. And let's see, we will start. I'm looking at the screen here. I will go counterclockwise because I think I usually go the other way. So start with Brandon. Was this a first watch for you? And what were your thoughts on it?
Oh no, not at all. I watched it a number of years ago. I can't remember. I remember getting it out of like one of those Walmart like cheap Blu-ray bin or DVD bins, and I was like, "Yeah, this looks like it'll be fun." And I did enjoy it. I liked watching Tom Hanks in another role. This time, I watched it after reading the comic adaptation, which I oddly liked better. The comic adaptation, which to me it made me feel like I just liked how they did it better. So I wasn't as happy with the film this time as I was the first time. I guess this is one of those times where the original material can actually lessen the main material, at least in my regard. I just felt like there was a lot more style to the comic than there was to the movie. That's not to debate the acting or anything else. It was very well done, but I actually preferred the comic to the movie. But I guess that's how it is with a lot of things. The book
Yeah.
always comes out on top. But still, great film. One I think that was snubbed in many ways.
At least it wasn't an Alan Moore adaptation because oh boy, the drop off in quality is pretty steep.
And we should mention you talked about the visual look. The graphic novel was illustrated by Richard Piers Rayner, and it definitely is a distinctive looking book, no question about it. So we will move along to Dave. Is this your first time? And what is your thoughts on it?
No, this is not my first time watching this film, and it was definitely a very gloomy beginning. Definitely a more serious role for Tom Hanks. Saw it like years ago, picked it up. What I did not realize is that it was actually a graphic novel until you guys started mentioning that this was like a comic book, and I'm like, what? So, to me, the comic book world, the extent of it is Marvel and DC and Dark Horse. Those are the three that I know. Anything beyond that, don't ask me.
Actually, the comic book was published by DC.
Yeah.
But I still didn't realize that it was a comic book. So
the comic book world is wide open, my friend.
Dave, you're going to learn a lot this month.
Oh yeah. Well, there's not just those three publishers, but you got a lot of Image Comics stuff. You got Valiant. You got I forget who published. You said DC. I don't think they published it for the paperback form, but
what I remember about the movie is that it was not a blockbuster hit at the time. In fact, it bombed. It bombed. It bombed. At the time, it bombed, and then it grew on people. From what I understand, you can say no, but the numbers say differently.
It was released in summer. It was released in summer as counter programming, and it never made the #1 spot at the box office. But it did okay for what this kind of film could be expected to do.
This is one of those things that would be better. This is one of those things that would inevitably have a life after its box office run, just given the nature of what it is.
Right.
But I enjoyed it. I thought it was a very cool period piece. And yes, I do believe that it was snubbed. I do think that it should have gotten more mention and more publicity, because I haven't even seen the novel, but this is a very cool look at the period of the time. So I mean, they've got the dress pieces down pat. They've got the weapons down pat, and they've definitely got the melodramaticness of it. So to me, I feel like this movie should have been looked at a little bit more prevalently at that time.
Right.
Other than that, I had a wonderful time revisiting it today for the show. So thank you to whoever suggested this movie.
Very good. All right. So next up, I think we have Chris. Chris, was this a first time viewing for you? And what was your take on it?
It was. I mean, I was aware of the movie, and what's that?
What's that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Oh, could you hear me, or? Oh, okay.
I didn't hear you right away.
Yeah, it was the first time. I was aware when it came out back in 2002, and I had a friend who saw it, and he liked it. And I was always kind of on the fence about it. I mean, I'm a fan of Max Allan Collins, but like big studio treatment of writers' work, I'm not really like a big studio movie person either. So I was kind of surprised. I ended up liking it a great deal. I guess I really liked a lot of the shot compositions, the way the camera work was done, the chiaroscuro lighting, like the noir, the shadow and the light, and how they use that. And uh, I actually thought it was a really good film. And like I said, usually I don't like most studio movies are not my kind of thing. So, uh, yeah, and I haven't read the graphic novel, though I've read Max Allan Collins, like his novels, like he writes Quarry and a lot of
Right.
different crime kind of noir novels. So I don't know as far as with the novel and the movie. I mean, I'd like to read the graphic novel one day, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like I said, I was pleasantly surprised by it. I actually
Mm-hmm.
I didn't expect. I wasn't sure if I would expect to like it. I was kind of like, well, I don't know about this, and then well, yeah, I actually thought it was a good film.
All right. How about you, Dane?
So I knew of this movie when it came out because I as a little kid and I recognized Tom Hanks from Castaway and That Thing You Do and the voice of Woody in the Toy Story movies. So I knew who Tom Hanks was. I did not see the film until college because I remember my parents were really off put by it, and I knew that they were very. I mean, they saw all the Tom Hanks movies that came out in the 90s and early 2000s and stuff, and I guess that they weren't really used to a darker role for him, and I guess a lot of the public wasn't either, but I saw it years later in college, and I did not know until that time that it was based on a graphic novel. Granted, this was back during the time when if something was based on a comic, they did not advertise that front and center. Nowadays they do, and they're very proud of it, which is good because that's how it should be. Always be proud of your roots. And so I saw it when I was in college. I knew friends that loved it, and I did love it too. I am a massive, massive fan of period pieces. I'm a massive fan of film noir. I'm a fan of the classic 30s gangster films, like from the period and films set in that era. Fan of Sam Mendes, fan of Tom Hanks. It's like, how could I not love this movie? But I'm a really big fan of beautiful cinematography and the fact that it had minimal dialogue and had mostly visuals and unbelievably beautiful music by Thomas Newman. It's like, what don't I like about this movie? Because it's like it's right up my alley, and I can't really think of anything I disliked about it. Which again, I am sorry to say I have not read the graphic novel. I had it in my possession at one point. I just never read it, and I sold it for credit, and I figure I'll get it back at some point. Yes, for like store credit at one used place. But yeah, I loved it. I was really happy to revisit it. Noticed a lot of things I didn't notice before. One of those things that I noticed that I totally forgot about was the fact that, and I think I saw the film before Skyfall came out because I noticed that. So it's a Sam Mendes film with a much younger Daniel Craig than we're used to seeing.
Yeah.
That was before Skyfall, before Spectre, and I was like, oh wow, so we've got a scene with like he's the primary antagonist of the thing, and Tom Hanks is the lead, and I could just imagine a scene in my head of Bond, James Bond. I'm Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump.
Right. Well, I kind of joked that like this movie has I didn't say Forrest. I don't know if I said Forrest Gump, but yeah, Forrest Gump. You got James Bond, you got Butch Cassidy, you got Superman.
Young Superman.
Yes, very young Superman.
And also Jude Law.
And also
Yeah.
Jude Law, Albus Dumbledore. There you go.
That's right. Well, and you know what's funny about a few little things very quickly. So Jude Law, this was something that I remembered from the Inside the Actors Studio episode that he was on. It was James Lipton remarked that there are very few leading roles in Jude Law's filmography, and he has said that he, doesn't really like playing the lead. He likes playing a supporting character, and for this film in particular, he wore those prosthetic teeth that were really worn down. And that kind of added to the character. And it's like, I kind of admire the fact that you have this unbelievably handsome male actor here. He's like, GQ model level handsome. And he's like, you know what? I'm okay with being a supporting player and playing those roles that, other, pretty boys wouldn't necessarily play. And he plays someone who is very not leading man material. He's kind of a sleazeball and a seedy character, and I'm like, good for you. That shows that you're not just a automaton. You're trying to be your own person. But that's another massive standout in the film for me, is the fact that you have this guy who has kind of carved out his own niche of looking like your classic movie star, and yet he takes all these roles that I think are very risky for someone like that.
And in particular in this one of the most iconic images in the film for me is when he shows back up at the lake house and he has those scars sprayed across his face from where where that glass had hit him earlier. And I was just like, that to me, that was great. But
that's good consistency.
Odd bit of synchronicity. This came out in the same year as Die Another Day, where one of the villains had glass in his skin too. So that must have been a thing that year.
Must be. You get the weirdest pairings in Hollywood.
I know.
How about you, Forrest?
Okay, so this is not my first time watching it. But okay, so I'm just trying to get myself. Okay, so actually, this is not my first time watching it. I remember having some interest in seeing it when it came out. After my mom had mentioned that it had some sort of Dick Tracy connection. I'm a huge Dick Tracy fan, which we're going to be covering in the next part of the show.
Yeah.
But I didn't quite know at the time why. But I never got around to seeing the movie in theaters. But I did find the comic book at Barnes and Noble and picked it up and read the whole thing. I later found out there was actually the comic was written by Max Allan Collins, who had a very lengthy run on the Dick Tracy comic strip. That was the connection right there. And I did see, and when I did see the movie, I think I enjoyed it. Tom Hanks is great as always. Actually, the whole cast is great. Tom Hanks is great. Love the cinematography. I like the use of rain, the rain motif, the music. It was overall it was a very well made movie, but I just remember being, having read the comic book, just feeling kind of disappointed. Because the movie does start out following the comic book, but it deviated quite a bit. It kind of deviated quite a bit as it went on.
Right.
Well, that's what happens. I remembered watching the other night. I watched the film adaptation of another movie that we're going to cover as part of this month, which is the adaptation of From Hell, the Alan Moore, Eddie Campbell graphic novel. And I remembered watching it and I was like, if I hadn't read the graphic novel and if I had zero knowledge of the Jack the Ripper case and didn't mind that it played pretty fast and loose with history, if I met all those prerequisites, then I probably would have enjoyed this movie. But having read the graphic novel and knowing about the Ripper case and that kind of stuff, I'm like, man, the drop off in quality is pretty steep in this one. Even though visually it was very impressive, I have to say.
Well,
but
it's going to be an interesting. It's going to be an interesting theme all through the month of like those of us that know the comics being able to compare and contrast. And I have not read From Hell, but I've read some Alan Moore, and I know he famously disavows almost all adaptations.
Oh, I know. You gotta read From Hell because
Right. I may try to. We have it at the library.
It's up there with Watchmen in terms of some of his best work, I think.
Still need to
I
read
will
that.
say this as a comment on the comic of this versus the movie. They had a better adaptation of it later on. It was called John Wick.
John Wick had a lot of similarities, yeah. So, Forrest, did you finish, or were you?
No, I was still, but
Okay.
I think it was overall well made, well acted. I just remember being disappointed with it, only because I'd read the comic book, so there were things in it that didn't carry over. For example, I don't know if this is spoiling it or not, but in the comic book, Michael Jr. Kills a guy. Right. With a gun. He shoots a guy who's trying to shoot at Michael Sr. with a gun. In the movie, he doesn't kill anybody at all.
They wanted to preserve his innocence in the movie, and but I actually do think that that I agree with you. That was a much better take.
I wish they kept that. I wish they kept that part, or that Michael Jr. had grown up to be a priest.
I kind of missed that a little bit myself. Yeah.
Also, but I did, so actually I didn't either read I didn't read the comic or watch the movie. So this I was in ninth grade back then. So this is actually my first time since I was in ninth grade that I've watched and read both Road to Perdition. I think both of them hold up very well overall, though both of them hold up very well. Although I'm definitely in the book was better camp on this one.
All right. So this one, Road to Perdition, was one that we got an interesting theme tonight, and Forrest just kind of introduced it a little bit. We have two movies, Road to Perdition and Dick Tracy, that are both strongly associated with Max Allan Collins. He created Road to Perdition and wrote the story. And he wrote Dick Tracy for, what was it, like 30 years, 25 years? It was a long time.
15 years, from 1977 to 1992.
Okay. 50, okay, that's he took over from the original. What's that?
As I said, that's a really long run for
it is.
He took over from creator Chester Gould.
Right. And of course, he also wrote the novelization of the film and did some other stuff along with it. But also an interesting thing about both of these were both movies I really, really wanted to see when they came out. They were both movies that were on my radar when they hit theaters, and I really wanted to see them. And they were both movies that I had no clue. Well, Dick Tracy, I think I was too young to really think about comic or book or whatever origin as distinct from movies. But I didn't really think of it as a comic book movie. Let's put it that way. This one, I had no clue it was based on a comic until after its release. I had no idea. I think Brandon mentioned that wasn't really as talked about back then. And so I had not read the book, and I did not read it until preparation for this. I finally read it last week. And I'll go ahead real quick. I don't know if anyone is actually watching, but give you a little bit of an idea of the artwork in this book. It is a very distinctive and very good, excellent artwork there. And it does share a lot in common with the movie insofar as it is not dialogue heavy. You can almost read the book too quickly because you might, it's sort of the same deal with me with reading comics like Naruto, where there's a lot of fight scenes, Yeah, when there's like a lot of fight scenes and it's not as heavy on dialogue. Of course, Naruto has lots of great dialogue in it, but there's a lot of heavy fight scenes, and you can go through several pages in just a minute if you're, you know. And Road to Perdition's like that. It can be a very quick read, or it can take a little longer if you just sit and soak in the pictures. But regardless, my initial take on the movie, I cannot for the life of me remember if I saw it in theaters. I can't remember. I know I really, really, really wanted to, and I know I saw it well before the Oscars, but because it was a summer release, it might have been on DVD well before the Oscars. So I can't remember. I think it hit DVD in the fall.
Yeah, it did.
So
summer release. So
yeah. So I know that I had seen it before the awards show. And that I went into it thinking, one thing that was weird about 2002, and you can use Catch Me If You Can as the linchpin here, you had Tom Hanks with a brilliant, totally against type role in Road to Perdition, and a solid supporting performance in Catch Me If You Can. And you had Spielberg directing one of his best 1-2 punches he ever did, Catch Me If You Can and Minority Report. And they both didn't even get a nomination. And I was utterly baffled by that. I was like, what?
Did Catch Me If You Can not get a single nomination? Huh.
No, Catch Me If You Can did, but neither Hanks or Spielberg got any credit for either of those movies. Or Hanks for this one, And it's like, Tom Hanks was the darling poster child in the 90s. And then I think it was from Castaway to A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood before he got another nomination,
Well, he got nominated for Captain Phillips.
Did he?
Yeah, Tom Hanks did.
I don't know about that. I thought Barked Abdi was the...
Yep.
Oh,
okay. He got a supporting actor nomination for that one.
Okay, because I know everyone was... No. He did not get nominated. It was Barked Abdi who got the nomination. I'm looking at the list here.
You sure?
It went from Castaway. Yep, it went from Castaway all the way to A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. So no Road to Perdition, no Captain Phillips, no Charlie Wilson's War. Just crazy. But anyway, well, the one who did
you're right about that. I totally thought he got a nomination, but that's kind of ludicrous that he didn't get a nomination because I thought that was one of the best performances he's ever given.
Well, I think part of it was a lot of the people here were against type, and people just didn't want to see Tom Hanks in this role. I think, even though he was brilliant in it. Yeah, it is.
I'm a big believer in actors that traditionally play bad guys, seeing them play good guys and vice versa, because it allows them to stretch their acting muscles.
Right. And again, we think of Daniel Craig as James Bond, but this was one of his early big roles. And, this was even before Layer Cake, where, again, he was playing a bit of a scoundrel in that one,
I thought he was in this movie.
Yeah. And then you get people like, Paul Newman has played a long and colorful career of people who kind of straddle the line. They're not really one or the other. But, and in this one, he does play an unrepentantly evil man as very sympathetic. Yeah. And it's a great performance. And he is one who actually looked almost exactly like the character in the comic.
Yeah, it did.
Like the casting was just, spot on. Now, one thing they did change that I think they changed for the better in the film is that they do make him more of a father figure overall. They really do take the time to humanize him, I think, more than they did in the comic, which worked, I think, very well for the movie. But overall, I have not seen this in a while, but I had seen it a few times back in the day. This was my first time seeing it after reading it. And when I was reading it, I was feeling like, wow, the first chapter is very faithful. And then I watched it and I was like, oh, it's faithful to how I remembered it. But they definitely changed a lot of the plot later on.
Yeah.
Al Capone had a small role in the novel.
Yes.
I've always thought it was a shame he was cut from the movie. It's a shame when an actor gets a role and it doesn't make it to the final cut.
Yeah,
I did watch the deleted scene this time with Anthony LaPaglia. He does a fine Capone, but it would have been interesting. But, you know.
And
but
also,
overall, what's that?
I said Elliot Ness also played a role in the comic too.
Yes, Elliot Ness was big in the comics and wasn't even, I don't think he was mentioned in the movie.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So that was an interesting change, definitely.
And interesting bit of synchronicity. Interesting bit of synchronicity here. Dick Tracy was actually based on Elliot Ness.
I believe I had heard that. Yeah, certainly not surprised. Just like Big Boy Caprice was loosely based on Al Capone.
Yeah,
you know, we'll and again, we can definitely dive deep into that when we do the Tracy discussion. But
yeah.
Overall, I still have very fond feelings for this one. Generally, I've been a big fan of Mendes' work. I feel like he is a very skilled director. Watching the commentaries, you watch him tell like every single thing. He's got a reason for it, and it might come off as just a bit pretentious, but it definitely comes off as a man who knows his craft and cares about his craft.
and talk about a master of visuals, because you look at this film, you look at American Beauty, you look at both of his James Bond films, and you know, you see a not so much
1917. I mean, you know,
not so much Away We Go. But that was a different kind of thing. That was like a rom-com, but like
it was a fun movie.
It was a fun movie, but like point being, like he's someone who knows how to think visually. So in other words, if you can which is beyond just having good cinematography, it's what I mean by that is like he's able to take an idea and say, can we communicate this in a way to where people don't have to say anything to get the point across? And this film is a masterclass of that. A cinematographer friend of mine actually pointed something out that I was looking for at this go around, and I don't know if anybody else noticed. Apparently, during the scene where Michael Jr., where he talks to his father about like, why did you parent me differently than my brother? Apparently the cinematographer had like a small light that was shining, kind of reflecting in Tom Hanks' eyes, that was on a dimmer and went down ever so slightly during that scene. And I think it was meant to symbolize that the light was going out of his father's eyes, basically. And quite literally. And I was watching for that because I didn't really notice it, but that's what I was told. According to the commentary, but I have not listened to the commentary. But I'll have to make sure that that's the case. That's just what I was told. But I was just curious if anybody noticed that at all.
I must have missed that.
I noticed that the first time I watched it, which is weird because I just thought it was kind of cool that it happened.
Yeah.
One thing I do know, as far as the cinema, we can go into like again more in depth on cinematography when we get to the tail end of it. But definitely the way they staged this was very intentional, very, very intentional. There was a lot the way that where they held the camera. You know, whether it was in or out of focus. Like when you meet Connor Looney, the Daniel Craig character, you meet him out of focus. Like he's first, and that was intentional. They intentionally held him out of focus for several seconds before they, so little things like that I thought were really kind of cool. And Hall was an old hand. He had worked with Newman on Butch Cassidy and a lot of other stuff, and so he knows his way around the set as well. And
you gotta love when we first meet Daniel Craig. You gotta love the fact that he's in the background. There, nobody says anything for most of that scene. It's all music, no lyrics, even just piano. And you can just see from their body language the kind of relationship that they have versus Daniel Craig, who's just sneering at them, with that kind of jealous look on his face. And all that's said is, "What are you smiling for?" Is because it's all so fucking hysterical. And it's like, that's all you need to say.
That's after the scene where Michael Jr. meets him up upstairs in the on the office, and that's the one I was thinking of. But yeah, that was a good little moment there. But anyway,
that's what I mean, though. It's like that's what's so brilliant about this film is that pretty much every scene is like that. People don't say any more than they need to, and if they can communicate an idea visually, then they do that. I think that to me is cinema. That's cinema. That's good filmmaking.
And Mendes says in the commentary that one of the things that attracted him to this was that American Beauty was such a wordy movie that it would be nice to do one where there was less talking and more doing. And he also had a dictum where they tried not to repeat things. If something seemed like it had already been said, they would find a way to show it or just cut it. So that was an interesting way to go about it, certainly, with a very few exceptions. And we'll try and I hope to mention one of them when we get to it. But I think we'll kind of start at the beginning. You kind of get a little bit of you start with the kid on the shore with narrating about, talking about his father. And then you start seeing a little bit of the home life. You see him and his younger brother and his mother. And, there's not a lot of the home scenes, but it's a good, kind of establishment. They go to a wake. And this was something that was new from the graphic novel. This was they changed it up significantly from the original to have this wake, but it's a great scene, I think, overall. Well, a great series of scenes. And this is where what we were just talking about with Daniel Craig comes into play. There were a lot of great little touches. Like, I like the little one where Michael Jr. and Sr. are praying at the casket, and he's looking, he's like, why the ice? And that's a touch you almost never see in the movies, of actually putting the casket on ice to keep the body cool. That was just a fun little touch but it was kind of his first touch.
Was formaldehyde used much back then?
I'm sure it was, but probably not. I'm sure a house full of people, it would still start to smell a little.
Yeah. Well, I wondered that because I was like, well, this was set in, I guess, 1931 or whatever, and I was like, that's probably wasn't in as common of a practice as it is today, or if not formaldehyde, but whatever other chemicals that they used for preserving bodies. But I did notice that this time around, and it was a very, very interesting touch there. I liked it.
Right. You also had the whole, you had the introduction to John Rooney, who, because something like, come give your old grandpa a hug or something like that. And, he holds his arms out and the kids run to him. He's introduced as this very charming, pleasant old man that is, and sure enough, just after the greeting, he absconds with the children to throw dice, which his father had asked. Michael had asked that his son not do that, but obviously, how's he going to go against his boss?
Yeah.
That nice little scene. But just your introduction to Rooney is very. And I'll admit, one of the changes that I found kind of weird, and I guess Brandon and Forrest probably bagged me up on this, is that they're actually called Looney in the comics. Yep. And Looney was their actual name. John Looney and Connor Looney were real people. And the filmmakers apparently felt that people wouldn't buy that as a real name. And it's like, but they're based off real people.
Yeah. Well, there are some
an Irish name.
Right.
Well, there's
then,
some
of course,
interesting things you find when you dive into mafia history
Right.
and stuff. Like, how did real people get named that? You know.
Right.
Well, actually, there was a kind of an ancillary character based on a real person in Goodfellas, and he's been a consultant on a lot of mob movies. Not Henry Hill. It was just some ancillary character.
Right.
But he was like, why do we call him, Fat Louie? Why do we call him this and that? Because he was fat. We weren't very imaginative, So, that kind of stuff that you're like, oh, it's such a cliche. Well, I get straight from the horse's mouth there. So,
Right. And then, of course, Mike Sullivan was originally Mike O'Sullivan. They just dropped the O for whatever reason, but it's a minor thing. But it's kind of interesting that they did that. But
then guess what? We have our main character, Mike Sullivan. The previous year, you had Mike and Sully, or James P. Sullivan in Monsters, Inc. And
yes, you did.
How the hell did that happen?
Yes, you did. And I guess that's kind of a tie into our last discussion because Monsters, Inc. also tied into Fargo. But anyway.
Yeah.
So
all ties together.
So you have a few pivotal scenes in this wake. The one is the one where Mike Jr. meets Connor in the office, and he you get the sense that Connor is not his old man by any means, by any stretch. Then you've also got the nice scene. You talked about the dancing, and both Mikes are kind of standing around looking uncomfortable. Mendes pointed that out in the commentary that they kind of mirrored each other in their social ineptitudes. But you also have Connor looking pretty darned uncomfortable. You also have, but then you have this wonderful moment where Rooney sits down at the piano and starts playing, and Mike joins him. And at one point, the camera pans down to show their hands, and Mendes said, "I did that on purpose so you could know they were actually playing." Because
Very
they were
very smart. Because like even something like wasn't it like Groundhog Day where Bill Murray didn't actually play the piano?
That was a pretty complicated piece, if I'm remembering what you're talking about. But
yeah,
this was a little simpler. But still, the idea that the two of them were actually doing everything that was being portrayed. But that scene also had that great moment. This was probably my favorite moment Daniel Craig had the whole movie, where he is watching them with that absolute, just angry smile.
Yeah.
And you see him breaking inside with jealousy. And I think it was right after that the younger son came up and asked him, "Why are you always smiling?" And yeah,
that was so fucking hysterical. And I was like, "Yeah, there you go. That's a Bond moment right there." Before he
like a Bond villain.
Exactly, but before he quickly degenerates into a whole movie of non-Bond behavior unbecoming a Bond.
Exactly.
See, I know you guys considered Daniel Craig the Bond character, but I grew up with Sean Connery and Roger Moore and some of those characters.
He's the Bond of the 2006 to 2021 or 22 or 23 or whenever the fuck No Time to Die actually comes out. But
no, Dave, I would say I grew up with Sean Connery as Bond. Yeah. I mean, a little bit of Roger Moore, but Connery was the main Bond. I think
Brosnan myself.
Yeah, I grew up with Pierce Brosnan, but I also grew up with the other ones too.
I think Brosnan was a great Bond, but he had weak movies for the most part to support him, unfortunately.
He only had one truly good one, like great one actually, was GoldenEye. Yeah, I think he was a better Bond than most of the scripts that he was given. If he had gotten better scripts, I think he would have taken them and run with them just as much as he did with GoldenEye.
And the one book I've read, The Man with the Golden Gun, Bond is closer to Craig than he is to Connery, but still,
Yeah.
it's been a while. I need to read more of those. But anyway, so did anyone else have anything they want to comment on the scene leading up to the confrontation with Finn McGovern? Or did anyone?
So very important storytelling aspect to Road to Perdition as a whole is the fact that I kind of joked that it was a family picture. Well, it kind of is. It's not a family film in the Disney sense, but it's a film about family. It's about what family ties, really get you in both positive and negative ways, because we got solid family ties that start off not so solid and then they become more solid over time due to crisis, and then you have more solid family ties that degenerate over time. And it's particularly effective because it's told from the perspective of a young child. And it's specifically about how one sees one's parent, specifically the parent that one is more distant from, at least initially. And that's really the whole dilemma of the movie set up in the beginning, is whether his father's a good man or not. And I've always kind of been of the opinion that Mike Sullivan is essentially a good man insofar as he wants to protect his family and do right by his family. But in his quest to do that, he ended up doing a lot of very bad things and serving very bad people. And as a result of that, you have somebody who, just like everyone, is a mixture of good and bad traits. And you find that he, on top of all that, he's also a product of his time, because he, being the patriarch, being the breadwinner, all that stuff, he's a bit distant from his family, from his children. Not that he doesn't love them, he just doesn't know how to express it in a way that someone might know how to do that today. And again, part of that is the time. Part of it is also his profession, because I think that in order to do that job effectively, you have to know how to emotionally shut down at very key
moments. Now, of course, at this point in the movie, we haven't gotten to that yet.
That's what I mean, though. Is like at this point in the film, you might think, "Oh, it's just a product of the time," which, in a lot of respects, yes, it was. But also, and they're also kind of a traditional family too, of Irish stock. So there's that too. Like, they're very kind of formalized in their, their way that they present themselves, the way that they pray at the wake, all that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, what I was hoping is if anyone else had any thoughts who hasn't really gotten to speak up, or had something that they really wanted to talk about those scenes, like something that really a notable moment or character or whatever.
Well, I really like the moments in between Tom Hanks and his character and his son specifically, because you get the character of the boy who's witnessing atrocities from his father, and then he's almost a witness to, like, the murder of his mother and brother. And then he's dealing with the aftermath of what does he do now? I mean, how does he handle how to go on from there?
Yeah, it's about the death of innocence, as well as a father-son story, kind of the reframing of that relationship, which does not start off very healthily. I mean, he's very distant from his children, and his Michael Jr. doesn't really know his father in any meaningful way. And so it is about the death of innocence, but he does find out who his father really is, but only then, in those moments of crisis and trying to survive, only then do they learn what each other is really made of, and only then do they get to bond.
All right. James Bond. No,
Exactly.
So we'll okay. So I'll just go ahead and move it, since it sounds like everyone wants to get forward into the meat of the plot. So basically, the wake is for the brother of a guy, Finn McGovern, who's played by Karen Hines, and Hines is not on screen long, but he does a great job with the role.
Huh.
And you get this great scene where, after Rooney gives this rousing eulogy, he lets the guy come over, and he comes really close to calling out his boss in front of everyone. And you get this part where Michael and Connor are silently called on to protect the man from himself. And then they go talk to him later. And this was a scene that echoed a scene in the comics, but it was a different setup. But it was the same basic idea where this person had been accused of disloyalty. In the comics, I think the guy actually was being disloyal, like he was trying to branch out on his own. In the movie, you find out eventually that Connor was behind it all. But they went for a chat that turned violent, and that's where the kid ends up seeing firsthand, what his father does for a living. And you get this part where the tables turn. Briefly, Connor was screwed. But then he realized, wait a minute, I have leverage now. Of course, he decides to use that leverage by murdering, he thinks, the witness to his malfeasance, and going ahead and killing the mother, because why not? Because he's just that twisted a character.
Yeah.
He killed the wrong son. And as it was pointed out, Mike Jr. kind of witnessed it. Didn't really, but he definitely saw Connor leaving.
Yeah.
Let me
And
see. Okay.
what's that?
Okay, just making sure my mic was working. Sorry,
Oh,
go
okay.
ahead.
But you have this great moment where he's looking at the door and Connor comes down, and he thinks he's been seen again, but Connor's looking at his reflection in the window and doesn't see through. And so the kid very nearly ended up getting killed after all, but he just barely makes it. And then, of course, when the old man was sent, again, this was a riff on the comic, he was sent on a fool's errand. He was sent with what he thought was a letter to this guy that he thought he was collecting a debt. And he sees that, they're going to attack me, and he shoots first and, picks up the letter. And I think it says, kill Sullivan and all debts are forgiven, or something along those lines. Yeah. And I think or all debts are paid. I think in the book it said, kill Sullivan and all debts and all sins are forgiven, something like that.
Yeah.
But it was slightly different, but it was an interesting scene. But when he sees that, he knows something's about to go down. He races home, but he's too late. And so that sets up the main gist of the plot, where he knows he and his son are in danger. Rooney knows his son is in danger. And both of them independently go to Chicago, and where the Capone operation factors into the story. And as I said, Capone never actually set foot in the movie. He almost did, and they left it on the cutting room floor. But you do have Stanley Tucci as Frank Nitti, Capone's right-hand man. And Tucci did, I think, a fine job in that role, too. But you get some interesting scenes there, because almost every scene with Nitti, it's like just business. He's very business-like. And
can we all just acknowledge what an unsung hero of acting Stanley Tucci is?
He's phenomenal. Yeah,
he never gets top billing, but every time I see him, I'm just like, man, this guy's good.
Yeah,
he's not like a raging inferno, but he sets these little embers here and there to keep a scene moving, and he's just so damn good at those things that he sets out to do. And
one of his best moments, one of his best parts in this movie is when later in the movie where Connor is just trying to come in all angry or whatever, and Tucci Nitty just talks him down, like just basically like he's talking to a child, because he kind of is.
Yeah.
He just tells him what is what. But then Connor's like, well, you're being very short-sighted. My old man, he's not going to be around forever. I'm the future of it. And just Tucci's reaction there, I saw he was just kind of like, I want so bad to shoot this kid dead right now.
Which, and you know what? All of this could have been avoided if Daniel Craig's character, if he'd have taken a page out of the Gospel of Dirk Diggler, which is jealousy will get you nowhere. And I'm going to keep rocking on.
Okay.
One thing I realized I was trying to say about that first scene that y'all were talking about earlier, and then I was like, "Oh, my mic's not working."
Oh,
that's why.
So what were you trying to do?
I was trying to originally point out that, and it's something that you pointed out as well earlier, is that first scene at the funeral was one that did establish a connection with the old man and the children that you did not get to see in the comic. One of the few things I did feel was better is showing that was as Dane had pointed out, family connection that really wasn't there. You didn't see the closeness. Even later in between where he's like, letting the other son know, yep, it's good keeping secrets and stuff like that, saying, I feel like he can keep this secret fine, these type of things. It's that's that to me is was one of the stronger points, giving them that connection. I thought that was a good way of doing it. Otherwise, though, it was what it was.
What's that, Dave?
I agree. I mean, it's really something when you have this a family that's all set up, and the oldest child, he ends up finding out the real reason why they have a roof under their heads, and to me, that's kind of something that you kind of feel and see throughout the film once it becomes them two on the road.
And we should also
the
give
reaction is different too.
Yeah. We should also give a shout out to the mother. Jennifer Jason Leigh plays her, and she has a very small role, but she does a great job. And one of the things with her character is that she sort of knows. There's this unspoken idea that he has not told her exactly what he does for a living, but she knows. And so there is that sort of feeling of she's trying to protect the kids too from that, knowledge.
One scene that we kind of glazed over was after the oldest child had, seen the whole thing. Right. He was actually in the classroom writing over and over, "I will not fight with other children." And I swear to God, I've had that done to me where a teacher has actually had me like write my name over and over, like on the classboard. Except that classroom wasn't as empty as that. She made me stand up in front of the whole class and do it.
I didn't think that was something that was done in relatively modern times, but who knows? It's
oh well, they did it with us. Of course, then again, maybe I guess the 80s aren't considered relatively modern times.
I guess not. I guess not anymore. I guess that they're receding further and further into the past.
I remember that very well. That was a regular punishment as a child.
Well, there you go. That's news to me.
I wanted to also point out one thing that was a big difference that I thought was better in the comics. They worked hard as hell in this movie to preserve this child as a fully innocent character from the beginning to the end. But it was in the comic that the main character, that Tom Hanks's character, worked harder to preserve his child's innocence than the child did. The child was preserving his own innocence in the movie, and because the reactions to how it is, whereas the child is more afraid and he doesn't want to hold a gun because he doesn't want to kill anybody or hurt anybody. In the comic, he's like, "Give me a gun. I'm gonna fight with you."
Yeah. Well, it's a difference in how much, because I tend to be, from what I've observed of children, I don't, get around them much, but like, from what I've observed, like kids of a certain age, like they're like, yeah, let's go run into danger because they don't have a sense of, their own mortality quite yet. But then I think with this kid, to me, he seemed like somebody who was more mature for his age anyway, and then as soon as reality hits him right smack in the face, he had to grow up a lot faster than he planned to. And I think that's kind of what they were trying to get at there. But I think, an interesting thing with Jennifer Jason Leigh there, and with wives of and husbands too of this sort, not just the mob or anything, but like I think about like say people whose significant others are in the CIA or something similar, where they cannot, as a matter of course, they cannot be truthful about exactly what it is they do because it would compromise everything. And it's like, even if you're not doing something outright illegal, there are people that have to live that way in order to do what they do. And it's like, there are some people that I guess they just have to be okay with that. And obviously his children, or this particular son, is not okay with that, wants to know more about who his father is because his father's clearly a puzzle to him. And of course, as soon as he finds out, then nothing's the same. And that's, again, why the title Road to Perdition is such a key one, because Perdition's the name of that town that their relative lives in, but perdition also is another word for hell. And so it's very fitting.
Yes, and it makes you wonder who would name their town Perdition.
Well, there's a town called Hell in Norway, if I remember.
Oh yeah, there's some weird name towns. Dave, you had an idea?
Yeah, I was. This is going to be a question related to the comic book to the movie adaptation.
Okay.
Do you all feel like this movie should have been more like the graphic novel, or do you think the graphic novel should have been more like the movie, or do you think that each should have been their separate entities?
Well, they technically are their own separate entities, no matter what.
Well, I think from the sound of it, Forrest had the strongest feelings on that.
Also, the comic book does predate the movie by about 4 years. So I think as far as as far as the movie being more, the comic being more like the movie, it's kind of like a hindsight 2020.
See, when it comes to comic book related movies, I tend to look at them separately as separate things altogether, because if you did an exact shot by shot comparison to a comic book, to me it would be rather boring, to be honest, and it would not give the director their own originality.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So if they change,
actually, there was very close. What you're talking about right there, Max Allan Collins was offered the chance to do a novelization of the film. And apparently he was told point blank, don't use any dialogue that wasn't in the film. And that's like, now that would definitely be putting a straitjacket on creativity right there, That's like,
totally. Well, I talked a little bit about From Hell there. I think a lot of the changes that they made for the sake of like a movie adaptation,
Mhm.
which has a certain finite length, some of it's understandable just for time. Because
Right.
if you tried to do like a straight adaptation of that graphic novel, you'd have to do it as a miniseries because it's just too long and too dense.
Right.
Oh yeah.
So certain things they do adapt better than other things just because of length and also just how they're formatted. And I have not read any John Grisham books, but from what I understand, the way that his novels are written are so easy to adapt because they
They are.
feel very movie-ish already.
Well, I've read quite a few of his books, and it typically takes me 3 or 4 days to read a John Grisham book if I can kind of focus on reading. Whereas a book by, say, Isabel Allende might take me about 6 or 7 days. A book by Stephen King's probably going to be a couple of weeks. You
Yeah.
know, it's a difference in writing style. Like King's books are very cinematic in some ways, but they're also very dense with detail. Very,
Oh,
very
yeah.
dense with detail. And you would have to excise some of it to get a proper film version. Like, you know, I would love it if they did a proper film based on, or film series based on The Stand, but you probably have to do like a series, either a 2 or 3 part movie. You couldn't do it in one go unless you want people to sit there for 5 or 6 hours.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
that's the thing.
sometimes those things they do, like you said, inevitably an adaptation is its own entity just by default, but then sometimes they lend themselves to more solid adaptations and other things. Or like say, this was in the same year as Spider-Man, which again, that's
Mhm.
it's a little out of the category here because that's a superhero adaptation, but yeah, that one had decades of comic book
Right.
history and stuff, so they had to condense all that down into a 2-hour film. And I think they did a remarkable
Mm.
job of that. But
Yeah.
so and that
Mm.
was again an ongoing series of stories as opposed to
Right.
one finite thing.
I
And
think
yeah, and
if
Dave, to
they,
answer, what's
I
that?
did.
I,
I didn't mean to meander off the plot, but I kind of
Well,
wanted the whole comic book to
yeah, that is a question
the
that's going to
atmosphere that you're getting from both.
that is a question that's going to
You
be
know,
coming up a lot this month because
Yeah,
I actually do have I have read Scott Pilgrim. I have read Ghost World. I'm probably going to read Snowpiercer. I've seen bits and pieces of Dick Tracy and Popeye over the years. You know, so there is some familiarity. Again, I may make time for From Hell, but that's such a big book. I don't know
it's worth
if I'll
it
have
though,
time
trust
for it.
me.
But the point of it being that, and you bring up Spider Man's a good example. With me, when it comes to comic book adaptations, I am much less concerned about slavish fidelity than I am to, if you're going to make a change, have a reason for it. Like, you know, a change like in this one, like where they changed the name of the Loonies, that was kind of a stupid reason. Changing up John Rooney's role relative to the Sullivan family, that was a nice change. You know, there are good changes to be made here. When we talk about Ghost World and Scott Pilgrim, I'll definitely have some comments on those changes that I think were for the better for the movies. With the case of a
I will
typical superhero one, if
I
they
will
take
say
a
from
character,
what you guys
what's that?
I will
go
say
ahead.
from what you guys have told me, I will say from what you guys have told me from the graphic novel, the
Mhm.
fact that they don't have Elliot Ness or Al Capone even in the film, and they were in. I believe that those characters should have actually been in the
You
film
can
somehow.
you can watch the Capone scene on the deleted scenes, but they did cut Ness out entirely. And Anthony LaPaglia is a fine Capone. I read they actually wanted Alfred Molina, but he was busy working on Frida. He would have been an interesting Capone.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
But he was so great in Frida. I'm not going to begrudge that in the slightest. Another role that was reamed by Oscar. But as far as the characters getting changed, Molina was not my visualization of Otto Octavius, but he did a great job with the role.
Oh, he was so good.
I've seen characters like that where the changes made surprised me, sometimes for the better. One graphic novel that the film adaptation is very, 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 very different. Specifically, the villain is almost polar opposite, is Kingsman, the Secret Service. The original antagonist is nothing like Samuel L. Jackson at all whatsoever, but it's a change that worked for the movie. But then you have characters where they just changed it for the sake of diverse casting or something like why did you need to make diverse casting of siblings in Fantastic Four? I mean,
Yeah, that one
didn't
didn't
need
work.
to do that. It was just trying to be overly PC, I think. Because yes, the Fantastic Four is one of the whitest comics in comic history, but
Yeah, that didn't work. That didn't work.
yeah,
at all.
so there are
Well,
ones that work.
yeah,
There are
there
ones
are a
that
lot of problems with Fen Stick from what I've heard.
it wasn't
Yeah.
near as
But,
bad as what they did to Doom. That was
Oh, I know. And it's sad. It's sad because like there's a part of me that does kind of like the direction that Josh Trank was attempting to do. Just insofar as I like body
Yeah,
horror, but it was totally not right for the Fantastic
Yeah.
Four. That's for sure. But I just like that somebody was attempting something like body horror in the 21st century.
all right. So
I wanted to get
what's
into
the
Dave's
plan?
question on there real quick.
Sure.
Just to say, and also to what you had said, Jake, which was, to me, I hold superhero comic book movies to film at a different standard than non-superhero comic book movies
Uh-huh.
to film. For me, by the way, I would consider Dick Tracy and Judge Dredd to be superhero comics and more similar than this.
More similar. I would
superhero.
still say that they. I would still say
But,
that for sure, Dick Tracy. He's more of a pulp hero. He kind of predates. He predates Superman. He predates a lot of what we typically think of as a superhero. But you're right insofar as he's closer to it than this is. That's for sure.
But
right.
when I'm looking at this is a narrative that is a straight out story.
Uh-huh.
This is one that you could have done shot for shot and done basically a John Wick. I don't know if they had the time or the ability to get Tom Hanks to be that level of action hero, but it was one that you could have adapted a lot more easily. So I do hold these to a little bit of a more fidelity standard than I would a superhero thing where you've got sometimes almost 60, 70 years sometimes of material. So, I mean, I don't expect anything.
Continuing stories, multiple continuities, multiple writers and stuff. This is like a one and done finite thing.
I don't expect any continuity in a superhero movie at all, and therefore I'm never disappointed. I'm just lucky if they name them the same one when they go in. Well, not anymore.
We talked about Fat Four Stick before.
Wait. Let's get back to this one. So meanwhile, you got the Sullivans on the run, and meanwhile, of course, Capone, Nitty, but under the auspices of Capone, is sheltering Rooney's son, and meanwhile they hire this guy. This is one of the changes from the book. Maguire is not in the book. And I am particularly curious, Brandon and Forrest, what y'all's thought on McGuire is, because I like him as a character in a lot of ways. But he is definitely what Brandon will know this parlance, a filler character.
You're talking about the guy who took the pictures of the dead.
The Jude Law character,
Yeah. He was my favorite
I thought he was
character.
unnecessary.
Same
I
here.
did, but that was me.
Are you kidding? He was my favorite character by far.
He didn't need some guy stalking him down.
He didn't really need it.
But again, that's my opinion.
I feel like he really took away from the movie for me.
I totally disagree. I think he kind of made the movie in some ways because think about it. He is he's a parasitic creature essentially. He's very representative of the time because keep in mind that at the time, the 30s, their concept of it was yellow journalism, and they're like nowadays we talk about fake news and stuff, but we also just talk about like news biases and that kind of stuff. The 30s, like 20s, 30s, like that was the golden era of yellow journalism, and that was the golden era of blood and guts on the front pages, all that stuff. And so he's the ultimate media parasite. And yet he is society's acceptable parasite because he's a media person. And yet, he's perfectly willing to participate in the blood and guts in order to make for those gory pictures and everything. And, so he's someone who, while you do have the mob on their tail and everything, it's important that they have someone like him because he is society's acceptable horrible person, and he's the one who ultimately immortalizes the dead in his own perverse way. And so to me, I thought he served a pretty essential function for fleshing out the world, but also that he's not a mob guy. If anything, he's kind of more subhuman than the mob in terms of his physical appearance, his parasitic existence, his he gets his hands dirty in a way that a mob person will shoot you. This guy will actually dig the knife in and he'll, make it look just right. And it's like, I don't know. I like those kinds of characters in general. And I like the function he serves in the story because he's so different from the other antagonists.
I have nothing against the character. I have it more against the fact that it takes away from where the center of the movie is, which is around Tom Hanks's character and his son, which is the majority of the comic.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. Like in the comics, a lot of those scenes probably would have been taken up by the scenes with Nitti and Capone and whatever, and but there was still more of a focus, I guess, on the main through line. In the commentary, Mendes makes a comment, and I'm not quoting him exactly, but he says something to the effect of, you've met all the basement floor, you've met like the bottom floor of humanity, and this guy comes along and he's the basement or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. It's like if the mob guys are like the predators that occupy the forest floor, like they operate on the forest floor. This guy is underground. He's in the dirt. He's a worm. He's a bottom feeder. And it's like you got to know that there are people like that who are out there, and yet he is in the facade of a media person, an acceptable part of society.
He does have an interesting scene with Sullivan at the diner, and I thought that was a great interchange. I thought the two of them, you got almost immediately Sullivan spots this guy for not being, for being someone who's probably been sent for him, and you've got this little tete-a-tete where they're kind of dancing around and not really saying what either of them really means. But then you got that one part where they're talking about what they do for a living, and he looks at Sullivan looks at McGuire and asks him, and McGuire just it zooms in for a close-up, and he just says point blank, "I shoot the dead."
Yeah.
But then he explains that he's a photographer, but just that double meaning of that line, I thought that was great that they could have that when he gets shot in the face and then he comes back with the scars. it's interesting because in a sense, the guy is more of a Dick Tracy character than any of the characters Max Allan Collins wrote.
Yeah.
And he wasn't created by Collins. He was created by the film screenwriter David Self. So I thought that was kind of an interesting sort of irony. I kind of agree that the character took some air out of the story that could have gone elsewhere. But it's an interesting trade-off, I think. I don't think new characters are inherently bad, but it does take a little bit away from the whole bank heist sequence, which was great. It was that was just that whole thing. And we got to mention this. This was from the comic, where Sullivan decides the best way to put pressure on Capone is by taking his money, which makes sense. Like I said, he met Nitty.
He couldn't do it alone. I like those driving moments between the father and son.
And actually the his son almost running into the tractor was taken out of the book. And there was something like, I don't remember the exact quote, but it's like he said the son comments that after all of these experiences that his father had been through, he had never seen him as white, as pale as he was at that moment.
Just in defense of Jude Law's character, additionally, I think not only does he provide that role of the bottom feeder that even the mafia that they wouldn't want to call themselves. Not only that, but I think it's the ultimate irony that they make it through all these mob guys. They execute their mission for revenge and their mission to a better life by the beach, all that stuff. And what ultimately does Tom Hanks in is this little weasel, that wouldn't stay dead. And it's like, isn't that just the perfect? To me, I think that's the perfect poetic irony that he's this thing that. It lives among the dead, and yet he won't stay dead until he's done his mission. He has that really creepy smile, whisper that he whispers to Tom Hanks as he's bleeding to death.
I mean, the contrast is instead of being taken up by this this antithesis character, that this super tough, almost invincible guy manages to be taken on in the end by a simple foot soldier, which is how it is in the comic. Which again, it also has just as powerful a message.
Right. And another thing from the comic that was very powerful that they mostly left out of the movie, and I did feel this loss, and I was kind of disappointed. In the comic, Sullivan O'Sullivan is well known as the Angel of Death. That is the reputation that precedes him. And you get a vague vibe of it in the movie, but they really cut out a lot of sequences where he could have shown that reputation. And they
with a pencil.
And I don't think they ever called him that in the movie either. And I think that's just great. They describe it as something like they called him Angel because he looked so mournful or something along those lines. And I just thought that was a great description. So that was unfortunate. There were a few things that I would have liked to have seen, but like I said, I do love the bank sequence. The whole he insists that only dirty money, only Chicago's money. And he says something like, this was right out of the book. If I find out that I took some poor farmer's savings, I'll come back and I'll kill you. I only want Chicago's money. And then he does that thing where it's like he blocks him and he's like, no, you take that for your trouble. Call it a handling charge and tell Capone I took it.
How do you know to trust me? If you can't trust your bank teller, who can you trust?
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
And then he goes out and Michael Jr. is just rolling the car up. no hurry. And actually, Mendes points it out in the commentary. He's like, Mike Sullivan just made a joke.
Yeah, that whole middle montage there, it does have some slight comic relief there, which the film is otherwise very, very serious. So that was nice.
Yeah. There were some nice little tension relievers there. The part where the son asks for, when do I get my share of the money? He's like, how much do you want?
Yeah,
$200.
That whole thing was great.
Could I have had more? I'll never know.
Yeah, because he's still a kid. He doesn't really know how much things are worth, and it's. I think that was a great touch, and like that's really when the father-son aspects of the movie really come alive. I think, and that's when they start to bond in many ways.
Mm-hmm. But eventually, what's that?
I did like in the book how he had said, I'm putting pretty much, we're just taking what we need, and I'm going to put everything else into a trust for you, and you're not allowed to use this for anything illicit. He wanted it all to be used for good.
Good, yeah.
And again, I thought that was another thing, again, of him protecting his son's innocence, instead of his son basically protecting his own, which was what I felt was the reversal on this version.
Another thing that was changed significantly from the book is that this appears to mostly take place in and near Chicago. It's not fully a road movie in the way that the book was, because Perdition in the book was in Kansas, and they were actually going cross country after the Chicago trip. Yeah, New Mexico was where Rooney had holed up, and that was a nice little touch where they had found a way to put Rooney away for illegal dealings, and Ness actually went after him personally. So that was a nice little change. The way they changed his fate in the movie, it was a great scene, but it wasn't as it had some great moments. It was very operatic. That was it was very the pouring rain and the one guard after another leaving only Rooney, and then finally he just says, I'm glad it was you, and that was a good moment, but it was very different. And I liked it as a set piece. It was gorgeous, but I'm mixed feelings about how I like that change thematically.
Well, you have to admit though that climax, that's what again, I still need to read the graphic novel. Graphic novels do certain things really, really well, and that's Alan Moore, his works tend to exhibit what graphic novels can do that novels and movies cannot do. You have to admit that with the climax of this film, that is what cinema is able to do that books and graphic novels cannot do, because you have the visuals, you have the performances, and you have the fact that like you say, one guard after the other, all of that is just visuals and music. Like there's almost no even sound effects in that moment, and it's like, I wish more movies did that, because I think that just showing music and visuals without sound effects, to me, that can be much more powerful. And I think it definitely was in that moment. It was very operatic in the best sense of that adjective. I thought it was beautiful.
It can be from an artistic point of view with just sound and visuals and stuff like that. But if films went straight that way, I think it would get very boring.
You gotta mix it up.
If they overdid it, for sure. It's more so that I tend to find that when you want a moment to really stick, that you can, and you have a really good composer, because that's the other.
Yeah, Thomas Newman outdid himself with this one.
That's what I mean. They were they should thank their lucky stars they had such a great composer and a great score. Because if you don't, then you do need the sound effects and everything. But with that moment where you can just let the music do the talking, the music and the visuals, it's like, do it, let it do what cinema can do that no other medium can. The closest would be like an opera on the stage. That's like the closest that I can think of. But I thought that whole moment is like, yeah, that does what only movies can do that in a way that that works. So, good on them for that.
I do want to mention the thing basically that triggers Sullivan returning to Chicago is the finding out, basically getting that evidence of what had been going on and what Connor had done. But he did this when basically the tap was turned off, the well ran dry. Capone took all the money out of the banks so that, and so Sullivan goes after his financial officer, Rance, who's Spider-Man connection here, played by Dylan Baker.
That's right.
Dr.
Kirk Connors, but not to quite the lizard. They didn't get there yet.
But I feel like he was more reptilian in this than he was in Spider-Man.
He was.
But it was, but the very, very brief sequence that ends in our Mr. Rance not being very happy afterwards. But then, and then they get back to Chicago, and eventually, there's the confrontations with the various guys. But real quick, I'm gonna go ahead. I haven't heard much from you, Chris. Did you have anything you wanted to throw in that we haven't? Have we been kind of running over you there?
As far as
just
like what
commentary.
Yeah, and the movie in general.
We've covered a lot.
I guess anything is specific. I mean, I liked how they, like I said, I was saying they used the camera work. I liked how they used their subtext in certain shots. I'm trying to think even what shots I was specifically thinking of, but I liked how they used the symbolism with water, and I liked a lot of those scenes. Like kind of like when they had the opening, and I guess it kind of towards the end of the movie, they had the kid kind of reflecting in the water, which I guess you could interpret it as sort of symbolic of sort of like the unconscious mind, and maybe the sort of the, I guess, like repository of all the like conditioning and him questioning, am I like my father? Growing up this way, could I end up turning out to be like him? I mean, I don't know. That's kind of the way I sort of interpret that scene where he's kind of looking out into the water. It's like he's looking out into his mind in a way, like reflecting on things. I don't know. I like those scenes a lot.
Mirror images.
I wonder if the water thing. I haven't heard anything specific about why Mendes tied most of the murders to water, but he did. It's either rain, or they're in the bathroom, or they're at the lake, or whatever. And I wonder if that's what's that?
Although they did omit the part of the comic where Michael, in disguise, while he's in disguise, he throws a woman overboard on a riverboat.
Right. Yeah. Well, the whole riverboat scene, which I think was based on a historical event, was left out.
That was another robbery. Yeah. Then they took out that. Yeah. That was one of the main straws that got Capone's people to go, do we really need to? Because they really took it out.
That was the thing that broke them finally. I think in the movie, basically taking out the elder Rooney, they no longer had a reason to protect the son. I think was where they were going for. But what I was going to say was, I wonder if the whole obsession with water was a tie-in to that phrase that blood is thicker than water, since of all the family relation. I wonder if that's where they were going with that. But they do come back to it because Connor killed the Sullivans in the bathroom. The mother was giving the son a bath. And so when finally the elder Sullivan goes back to Chicago and back to the Capone headquarters, basically, he basically comes in ready for vengeance, and they just step out of his way, and he finds Connor in the bathtub, and it's a great. The shot is staged wonderfully. It's like you see him fire off screen because the bathtub is behind the doorway. but then the door moves and it's got a big mirror up and down, and so you see the aftermath. It's one of the only times you see the aftermath, and it's fitting that it's Connor because he deserves it. But you see it.
I might have said that the rain might be kind of a takeoff of in literature, whenever people are in like rain or water of a body of water of some kind, usually in a literary context, it's usually a reference to baptism. And then there's also the biblical phrase about how the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike, which in its original context, because they were in the desert, in the original context, rain was meant to be mercy. And nowadays in our kind of culture, we tend to think of rain as being kind of this not so great thing.
Right.
But point being that people die in this rain, that it does it's this violent outpouring of fluids, in this case water or blood, and yet it does get washed away, and the rain occurs during these pretty key kind of baptismal moments in the various characters' lives. So I think you could kind of read it a couple different ways like that, but those are just ones that leap to my mind.
I think that's probably a good reading on that too.
There's your Bond connection too, because Bond ends on the water usually.
Yes, Bond always ends on the water. Usually with a bird on his arm,
Yeah.
And,
I mean, I kind of took it as sort of the theme of the sort of the dichotomy between like purity and innocence, and then like violence and depravity. I guess that's the way I kind of interpreted with when they had the rain and all that. Kind of that sort of the theme throughout the movie.
Right.
And that was the way I would interpret it. It just had that sort of paradox, I guess, that was in the movie.
And rain does fit that bill too. Like as Dane said, a lot of times people look at rain and just as this bad thing, but it brings life. Without it, we would be kind of screwed. So it's got its ups and downs, definitely.
That was the whole, in that original parable there, the whole idea was that that the sun shines down on the just and the unjust, as does the rain fall, and that, in other words, that everybody is open to suffering from God and mercy at the same time. In this case, again, like I said, nowadays in our non-desert centric culture, we see the sun as good and rain as bad. But point being that here the rain, it does give life, it gives new meaning to these characters during these key moments in the story, new ways of framing their lives, and yet it's at the cost of people's lives, and their blood is flowing just as the rain's flowing. So, and yet the rain also washes it away. The characters change as a result of it. So I mean, it's a lot of you got a lot of different layers there.
Right. So I think we've basically hit the entirety of the plot, and as we've gone along, we've hit most of the stuff. But does anyone feel like there's any particular aspect of any of the characters that we didn't really get into? Anyone have any further comments on particular individuals in the film, or do we mostly cover all of that?
I wanted to hit two key points with the sun, which are very different from the comic. Again, I feel like that one of the main things I actually take with this is that I do feel like the film did everything they could to protect the son's innocence entirely throughout, which I think was more of a sign of the times than anything else. But to me, there were two times that the son killed in the comic. Once was when they were in the I want to say it was in the office where he was getting the stuff to put Rooney away for good, and he had shot the guy, but he didn't kill him, and the son manages to save his life by shooting the guy. And that was actually when they were trying to track him down. So yeah, this one was shot by somebody else, obviously not full grown by how he shot him. But then at the end, where you have that, instead of Tom Hanks again protect it. Well, this time Tom Hanks's character did protect his son's innocence by shooting the guy instead of letting the son do it because he didn't want to let him do it. But the son instead had shot the guy who killed his character.
Killed Michael Sr., yeah.
Yeah, but then he utilized that money then to have his sins forgiven and help others by becoming a priest, which I do feel like that was I like that ending better. But that
and actually, one thing I forgot to mention, well, I started to, and then I guess I got sidetracked when I was talking about how this wasn't quite as much of a road movie as the book. The book was very much, they were going to multiple states, to multiple places, multiple towns. And early on, Michael Sr. had put a dictum in that when we go to these each town, they would go to a church, but they would not go to the Catholic Church because the Catholic churches were affiliated with Chicago. They would go to the Protestant churches, even though they were Catholic. They were trying to stay somewhat off the grid. If I remember correctly, I think a lot of that money ended up with the churches as they went along. I could be. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But yes, the idea that Michael did eventually become a priest. I like the circularity of the movie version. It does work as a movie. But I do think if we had seen maybe an older Michael, maybe in a cassock or whatever, or standing on that shore, you could have gotten a similar effect, but seen like the passing of time or whatever. But it was an interesting touch that they had that he eventually became a priest. I thought that was so. It is a little bit of a shame that they didn't have that, in the film version.
And I kind of like the open-endedness of the film where we can kind of, I don't know, we're left up to. I like the ambiguity of it because he simply says that he was my father. So in other words, the conclusion that I got from that was that this son, it's. I think part of what I thought was really poignant about it is that I've in my life if it's been family or friends or whoever. It's like the longer you know people and the older you get, the more that people that you otherwise, have in your inner circle or people that you care about or whatever, they will often either become people that you don't like or they'll exhibit qualities that you don't like or don't approve of. And sometimes it can reach that point to where they feel like two different people. And in his case, it's like he thought his father was one way and then he finds out his father's a different way. Some of the aspects of the old version he liked more, other aspects of the real version he likes more, and vice versa. And so, in other words, all people that you know and love are mixed bags. And so that's why when he says he was my father, it's like he wants, I interpreted that like he wants to hold on to the fact that his father, was his father and did kind of shape him into who he would become, for better or for worse. Doesn't approve of everything that he really was, but, he's trying to preserve that part of him that, wants to say, this was my father. It was the one who shaped me into who I am in a positive way. And I think that's ultimately what he's trying to hold on to, despite all of the evidence to have him just throw everything overboard. And I thought, well, that's really poignant to me because regardless of what he chooses to do with his life, you get the sense that he's going to try to hold on to the good parts, even though, like his father said to him, he's like, you had too much of me in you. And I think that's a real danger that a lot of people have with certain parental figures that maybe they don't quite get along with, is that sometimes it's because they have too much of their parental figure in them. And so that's where a lot of the conflict can come in.
Right. He is very much afraid that his son will want to follow in his footsteps. And that whole thing where he said, he is my father, or he was my father. I thought that was a great way to answer that question. And just a fun little tidbit. Of course, the kid is Tyler Hoechlin, who eventually would be Superman.
Yep.
And it's interesting that he ends the film going to an old farm in the middle of nowhere with a kindly old couple who
In Kansas.
apparently adopt him.
Yeah, yeah.
Kansas.
Yeah, well, yeah, they actually left them alive. Didn't they? They left the couple alive that adopted them in the movie, which they killed them in the book. So.
Well, in the books, it was their actual family.
Yeah, family that
they
was
got
killed.
killed.
Yeah.
Who got killed, yeah, and that was unfortunate, definitely. You kind of get you wonder in the movie, they don't really explain that because it's their property, but you don't see any bodies, but you do see the dog, and you figure if the dog's there, maybe they're there. So
Yeah.
that's an unfortunately open-ended, it's kind of a grim open-ended thought there, but anyway, I guess we're probably getting to the point we've covered most of the technical aspects as we've gone along. Again, phenomenal camera work from Conrad L. Hall, who unfortunately passed away before the Oscars, got a posthumous Oscar, which is uncommon, but he managed to pull it off. It was the only win, sadly, for the movie. But you did get Dennis Gassner's art direction nominated, the sound, the editing, Thomas Newman's score. Thomas Newman was nominated, I think, 14 times before he finally won. No, he hasn't won yet. He's been nominated 15 times, has never won an Oscar.
Unbelievable.
That
This
is
was such a gorgeous score. I mean, if we talk about favorite scenes, I mean, I have a ton of them, but like the one that like immediately grabbed my attention when I first saw this and kept it the whole way through was just even the opening with the opening theme. On the soundtracks called Rock Island 1931. That whole opening theme, I was like, man, this is such a good theme that it totally grabbed me right off the bat, and the score doesn't disappoint throughout the whole movie.
It is, yeah, it's a phenomenal score. And then, of course, the one other nomination, the one acting nod was for Mr. Paul Newman. And it's notable that this was Paul Newman's last live action movie role.
Yeah.
He had a key role in Cars, and he had some television work after this, but that was about it. This was his last live action movie role. And given the elegiac tone of the film, I think that's a pretty darn good swan song.
Yeah, it's a good one to go out on, that's for sure.
Right. But did y'all? So Dane, you kind of touched on a favorite there. Did anyone else want to? I guess we could go ahead and do favorites.
Did Chris? Did you or Dave have anything to say about the production?
Oh yeah.
As far as the music goes, I enjoyed the soundtrack. I mean, it was definitely very noticeable. I mean, in some of the films that we've discussed before, you know, some have been like non-existent or not even worth remembering. But I do have to say that the music is very memorable, and I do have to give credit to that. As far as production values, I mean, I didn't really have that much of a problem till I started hearing things that were in the comic book that probably should have been in the movie. So most of this has just been kind of more of a self-aware realization. Okay, maybe this film should have been better, but
that's the thing, though. It was good until I liked it a lot more before I read the comic. This was
until you crack.
I think it probably would have been better too.
Until you crack the altar that you put these films on a pedestal on, you know, and crack the surface with other people on it. You know, I mean, it's like a film that I watched at a time where other people were shitting on it, and And see, I didn't hear any praise on the movie until you, Jake. So
Really?
Really?
Yeah.
That's
Um,
weird.
That's kind of shocking because
Why are you
I thought
saying
this was pretty
David?
well liked.
no, it was not well liked at the time. In fact, maybe on the inner circles it was a little bit better, but everyone around me at the time was like, "This movie sucked." So
It's that Tom Hanks thing that most people looked at and were like, Tom Hanks shouldn't be the bad guy.
And I
That
think
concept.
also it might have been the fact that it was released in the summer.
maybe
and
it's
that it
where
was a
I
gangster. It's a
maybe it's
gangster
where I
film.
live.
Well,
It's very
also
possible.
part of it also is this is a gangster film that has a lot more Miller's Crossing than Scarface. You know, it's
Yeah.
much more. It's much more melancholy. It's much more artsy. It actually would be a good counter. It'd be a good companion for Miller's Crossing in a lot of ways. But I think they are both phenomenal films, but they are not Scarface. And if
Nah.
someone who's coming to gangster films with that as their expectation is going to be disappointed.
Disappointed. Well,
I love
the
gangster
other one that I do too. The other one another comic book based movie that watching it again, this reminded me. It covered a lot of similar territory to Logan, which obviously superhero thing,
Well,
but it did cover a lot of similar territory there.
and we cannot let this pass without talking, and Mo would never forgive us if we did, without mentioning the actual origins of Road to Perdition. Max Allan Collins has been very clear that this story was, in his mind, an homage to the manga and film series by Kazuo Koike, Lone Wolf and Cub. And there's a very big Lone Wolf and Cub reference here. I actually watched them maybe for the first time to prepare for this. And plot-wise, there's very little in common, but the basic concept is not dissimilar. But yeah, I think wasn't Mo's description of something like he had an amusing description and he couldn't join us, so he wanted us to share his.
To mention, there was one thing about Max Allan Collins that I'm surprised, Dane, that you did not mention. His connection to trauma.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because he was the writer behind Mommy and Mommy 2.
Oh, okay.
Mommy and Mommy's Day.
I didn't know that.
Okay, so I wanted to go ahead and mention here. So Mo asks if somebody could impart my love for Lone Wolf and Cub and my appreciation for how this blended that perfectly with Leon the Professional and The Godfather. That's an interesting description, but I could see that.
Honestly, this movie was not like you said. If you're coming in to see Scarface or like I was gonna say like Goodfellas, because Goodfellas is probably one of the most fun gangster movies. Despite it overall, it's a serious movie, but like it still has that element of fun to it.
Oh yeah.
This is much more in the line of a melancholic film, and it's kind of similar to like there's one of my favorite gangster films of all time from 1931 was The Public Enemy, starring James Cagney, because
we need to do that.
Yes, we do.
I have a copy that needs to be watched.
Well, that one also has a climax in the rain. And it's got, the trench coats, it's got the serious faces, it's got, the brutal killers. And it was a very brutal film for 1931. And so, I mean, you could probably, compare that a lot in this because there's a lot to compare it to. But, like this is much more in that vein of, this is, and that's more the vein that I prefer for crime films and for film noir in general, because I think that this has more in common with the gangster film than film noir, even though there's some overlap there. But they're not necessarily the same thing. But I do really love the melancholic gangster film the best.
All right. So yeah, let's go ahead and start getting everything wrapped up and whatever. So let's start, I guess, with you, Brandon. What are your favorites?
Favorite scenes for this movie. I really did like the opening scene at the funeral. I thought it was well done, well put together. I liked how they established it. One of the things that I did like more about this than I did the comic was the relationship that they built between Looney and he's going to be Looney to me for that.
Right.
And and of course our main character and his children. And I did like that. I liked how they carried that throughout the movie. It was probably one of the things I thought that they improved upon from the comic. So,
Mhm.
and that first scene established it so well. I have to go with that.
Mhm. Good deal. How about you, Dave?
I would have to say my favorite moment or moments are the moments where they are between Mike Sullivan and his oldest, especially when he's sitting there reading the financials, and his kid comes in, and he sits down and asks him, did he like his brother better than him? And uh, that's a very touching moment, because I'm thinking it's like he's bonding with his kid like he never bonded before, because I feel like he led a life where he wasn't really around much to see his both of his sons grow up even, and this is like a pivotal moment where he's finally able to be father to the son. And to me, it's very much I would almost consider this like a Father's Day film, because because of the values that you see between father and son, and how much of his innocence he's willing to protect, and how far he's willing to go. So those little tiny moments I will hold dear for me.
Very good. All right. And Dane, you talked about the opening sequence and the music. Was that that was your winner, or?
That's a big contender. Other ones that I liked was, well, the scene that David mentioned. Really loved the climax in the rain. I really love the intro of Jude Law's character. I think that's I could see a whole movie just about that character. I think I like that. Well, actually, they kind of made that movie. It was Nightcrawler with Jake
Yeah.
Gyllenhaal.
Oh man, yes.
Yeah,
That's
those are
another
just,
one we got to hit.
we really do. But like, those are just some other ones I want to throw out there. But I think, as far as just like totally capturing me right from the beginning, I think just the opening theme and the way that it sucks you in, it's like, yeah, this totally lays down the case that this is going to be a beautiful film, but it's going to be a very melancholic one too.
Good deal. How about you, Chris?
I liked the various scenes, I guess, with the relationship between the father and the son. Specifically, the scene where Dave mentioned where they were talking, and he brought up his brother, and just kind of the sort of the sense of loss you could kind of see with the father when they were talking about, and then I liked. There's a lot of scenes I liked, especially with the lighting and the shots. That part where he went to, I'm trying to think of the character's name. He walks in and there's that guy that frisks him. I'm trying to think of the character. When he finds that note, I like that scene a lot. I like the way it was lit and everything and shot. I just can't think of the character's name. I only saw this once in pieces, but it escapes me at the moment. I liked all the scenes with the I don't know. There's a lot of scenes I liked. I was trying to think of
That's kind of where
the
I
scene
was
with the
at one
water.
point. I was
Right.
like, what was the bad scene?
Yeah,
Was
I
that-
mean, like I said, I saw this over a course of a few days in pieces, so I'm not probably as familiar with the movie. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I can think of, but I'm not quite as so. But yeah, I liked a lot. Like I said, a lot of the lighting, like the shadows and the pools of light and
Mhm.
the water. The scenes with between the father and the son, and those I'd say those all those things were probably favorite parts or better, best parts.
Good deal. How about you, Forrest?
I know you weren't a big fan of it, but I love the when he confronts Rooney, the elder Rooney in the rain.
Mm-hmm.
I just really like how that scene. I mean, just from a filmmaking standpoint, I just really like how that scene was shot
Mm-hmm.
with the rain. It just really lends to the atmosphere. Really lends to the atmosphere.
Yeah, that was probably the most visually captivating scene in the whole
Right.
thing.
Mhm.
I think another scene that would be one of my favorites as well would be the scene where the Capone's right hand man basically tells Daniel Craig's character that he's basically a little boy.
Right. Yeah. Right.
For some reason, I always like it when people are told the truth.
Right.
When they're put in their place.
Correct.
Well, and again, you saw how effective that was because he came right back with, why could you use that tone of voice with me? You're being really short-sighted here.
I'm the future.
It's like, yeah. And I'm sitting there, like I said, you can see in Tucci's face, yeah, in your own deluded mind, you're the future. No.
When I love it was like if that's what it'll take to make this go away, then do it.
Right.
And and of course it's never that simple.
So yeah, for me, definitely as an overall sequence, the opening wake I think is just a wonderful sequence. It has great moments. The little sitting at the piano, but that moment between father and adopted son with angry, jealous son looking on in the background, and you've got just the little moments or like Finn almost loses it and gets ushered out and just they're again this time around I not only watched it but I watched the commentary track, and with Sam Mendes speaking instead of the characters, you get to focus even more on the facial expressions and just the acting across the board in this film was phenomenal. It really should have gotten more love for the acting, and that it's really hard to single out specific scenes or whatever because there's so many little moments. And again, Forrest, that scene you mentioned was again a phenomenal set piece. And while I feel like it may not have been the best end for Rooney, it was a great scene in and of itself. And just visually, musically, everything, just, So, yeah, overall, I'd be hard pressed to pick a single moment.
They all
but
fit
there were a
together
lot of good
so
ones.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. And for a movie with relatively little dialogue and a slow pace, it doesn't really drag that much, which is
No.
very impressive. So that's but anyway, I guess that's Road to Perdition. Anyone else have anything they want to throw in, or are we ready to move on to the next one?
I just love it as a gangster film, and I love
think,
gangster films in general.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, then.
I think we're ready for the next film. So So, ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen, thank you for listening. Hopefully, you had fun with us on this particular discussion. And we're going to go into another fabulous discussion in a little bit. So join us on Inside Movies Galore as we discuss Dick Tracy. So have a good night, ladies and gentlemen, and tune in for some exciting stuff.